Hey everyone. If anybody knows me, there's probably one soapbox more often than not that I find myself on. And that's really the misalignment of goals between sales and marketing teams. In this episode, I sat down and chatted with David Ledgerwood about how to overcome some of these challenges. And Ledge really opened up in this one and he shared some of his candid thoughts about the challenges of getting things like executive buy-in and putting comp plans together and key shared KPIs between sales and marketing to make them talk and communicate better. So super excited about this episode. I think you're going to like it. Let's get into it.
It's interesting to me. There's a topic that has been this has been like sales and marketing, sale or marketing and IT, marketing and the finance department,
Sometimes it feels like sales and everybody. I don't know.
sales and exactly, sales and sales leaders. But what's interesting to me is this topic in general has just been blowing up here recently on LinkedIn and other places where people have decidedly taken their stance and they've said, this is what where I'm going to draw the line. I'm either going to be on this side or this side. And I don't know, I did a LinkedIn post not too long ago where I was talking about we're both wrong and we're both right, and on the sales and the marketing side, and we're both arguing the wrong topic. And so I'm,
Right.
I'm curious about what your thoughts here on this, and I'll dive into that. Before I do, I just wanted to do the intro real quick and just have an idea for the audience of what you do and where you came from and why this is such a big topic for you.
I did the consulting and sort of Fortune 500 thing that all of us were supposed to do in the 90s and got the names on my resume, and glad I did that, but don't ever want to go back again. And I started, right, I got my logo bar,
Yep.
so I don't need to go back. And then got involved in the tech scene up in the New York area for a while, and then decided that I wanted to do my own company. So I was just really wanted to be an entrepreneur, and picked up and moved all my stuff to Nashville, and very naively kind of hung out a shingle and didn't tell anybody about it and tried to figure out. Turns out marketing is a thing, but you can't just start doing stuff and not tell anybody. I had to learn sales and marketing just by nature of hiring a bunch of practitioners and then not having enough revenue to feed them and myself. Came to sales in a natural, organic sort of fashion, but then I really just was like, yeah, I dig this. You get to have relationships with people. You get to help build companies, and I loved being on the revenue side. And as I did a lot of startup incubator style work and mentoring and all these things, I was put off by lean startup in particular, just doing all this. Everything was about customer discovery, and then let's do some slideware and try to raise some money. And I just thought that was weird.
Yeah.
I was like, why isn't anybody talking about actually making revenue? And I ended up falling into the sort of B2B services type of realm. So software and services. And I liked that. And it wasn't the same thing as selling SaaS, because you didn't have this replicating MRR, ARR type of world, but consulting, professional services, marketing, premium sales, all types of different things were interesting to me. And I started to have this idea that as I grew several companies from to back room, 300 grand of revenue to 5 million, 10 million. And the most common thing there was just having to figure out how to make relationships and lead flow happen. And yes, it was marketing, but we had to figure that out from basically nothing. And I liked doing that. So I built a company with a partner called Ad10 after several experiences of running the same playbook of going, what is it that you do to run from your 300 grand to 5 million in a services business? And let's turn that into a service that you could buy incrementally or interim basis, because you could do that. Why could you buy a fractional CFO? That was really normal. You could buy a fractional COO or CMO, but you couldn't do that for sales. And I looked around and it was like you could pay consultants and coaches and outsource your outbound calling and all these things. And you couldn't find anybody to just, I'm going to come in and close deals for you and let's focus on revenue. And that's what we wanted to do. And we've been doing that for a couple of years, and it's cool. We get to close deals. So that's what I like doing.
So that's fascinating to me. I think just coming from a SaaS sort of background myself and D2C, e-commerce, that sort of thing, professional services is not something that I'm entirely familiar with. So what you were talking about going from 300K to 5 million, what does that look like is there a renewal period? You know, obviously, that rolls into the next year. If you thought about it from an ARR perspective, maybe not MRR, but an ARR perspective, what's the average like ACV of a deal, of a professional services deal that you're talking about?
It depends on what it's tied to. So we have worked with clients that have enterprise SaaS B2B type of model where you very often, whether or not you want to admit it on your P&L, you have to have some kind of professional service implementation, onboarding, consulting type of vibe, because these things are so expensive and they're so hard to integrate, and there's a lot of change management that gets involved. Some folks spin it off into an MSP or have a partner type of approach, but those can be quite large, $350,000 deal just to get something up and running, sometimes into the millions. We like working with very small companies, premium marketing agency, maybe with single ticket of the 10K to 5K, or maybe there's a lot of services that actually are MRR and are $5,000 a month, but it's not like you can just Google and buy that. You still have to have a high touch sales type of experience. So it ranges depending on the business, but from a SaaS standpoint, I will often work with companies and think about, all right, if we're doing B2B SaaS, like how do we integrate this thing really well? If you can buy a multi-$1,000 thing with an annual contract without having to talk to a human, that's awesome. So no, don't talk to us at all. But chances are there's a reasonable chance that somebody has to talk human to be convinced to do that constellation decision making.
So you have a product that you are selling. You've built a custom lead and close cadence, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. We'll dive into that in a minute. So you're typically going to a client, or they're coming to you, and they're saying, "Hey, like we have a great product. It's awesome, but we don't know how to sell it, or we don't have enough capacity to sell it," and they work directly with you to be able to serve accelerate.
Yeah, you want to have
pretty good
in our world.
Okay.
We're looking for people that are not necessarily go to market. I have a great idea now, bring me sales. Magical, interestingly to the original topic, is very often a little bit more on that top of funnel. Hey, let's generate leads and draw some interest from the marketing efforts, right? This isn't like people will often come and say, I need sales help. And you hear about it and you go, is that really sales, or do we have a marketing issue here? And so sorting that out is part of that thing that I think it's not so easy to go sales or marketing on. But from a product standpoint, very often folks will bring in things and I go, yeah, you got 200 free signups a week. And some of those probably want to spend more money, but you really aren't converting them. And is this a product-led marketing issue where you actually want the thing to do the work, or maybe you actually don't care about that and you're interested in drawing on the 30 to 50 grand per year of professional services revenue that you could derive from that and sell the service or the subscription just alongside that, because the subscription, once you heavily embed it into that company, is going to stick around indefinitely. So the ARR drops because of that, sort of misnomer revenue at the beginning, but there's nothing wrong with building and potentially even bootstrapping off that cheap revenue at the beginning to get that company off the ground, save yourself having to raise a bunch of venture at a crappy valuation. And we've even seen multiple cases where we would advise you to build that professional services, a sort of service infrastructure, almost like a totally separate business unit. Because when you do want to clean up your P&L to raise money, you just spin it, and now you have a wholly owned outside MSP type of arrangement, which is really just your sort of your stamped out copy of this is what a channel partner relationship ought to look like. So if we playbook that, we can go to other MSPs and say, just do this, we know how to do it, and build the channel marketing approach. So it's very much a B2B related type of thing. But you could be smart with that. And I think that playbook model, regardless of size of business, don't just do the thing, write down the thing and figure out how do we replicate this at some kind of scale, regardless of how you account for it.
So you had said something earlier where you had said sometimes we'll go into a company and we'll talk to the leader, maybe it's the CEO level, where they will come to you and they'll say, hey, look, we need more sales. We need to close more. But then you dive into it, and really what you're seeing is maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually more of a marketing issue than it is a sales issue. Or it could be vice versa. And sometimes they get conflated. So I'm curious, if you took a step back and just for the audience's benefit, I think it would be interesting just to outline really quickly, outlining where you see CEOs typically looking at the sort of the delineation between the sales or between the marketing, lead gen, demand gen, and then the handoff wherever that dotted line is, right? Sometimes it's over here, sometimes it's over here, and to either a BDR or a triage or an AE to be able to come in and close. How does that work for you? Like, where would you draw that line, that dotted line?
Think of bottom of funnel sales is typically, let's just say on average, a one-to-one conversation where I need to make, as a salesperson, I need to make this solution fit that customer one-to-one. I've now gone out of the world where we're talking about average clients that are based on personas and that are based on this sort of picture of here's what our client looks like. And you've all seen a marketing persona and all that stuff. Once it gets down to the bottom, it's some version of that isn't exactly matched to that, because marketing must work as a one to thousands type of broadcast mechanism. And so that's why we can talk about our average customer, or we can talk about a persona, or this is the person we're targeting. We're trying to make content relevant to some picture of a client that isn't really a client. It's just an avatar, right? Where that company draws the line on it becomes an actual conversation one-to-one with someone that is no longer the average and is actually just a data point, and so one customer interaction or prospect interaction, that's sales now. Those conversations, we can no longer rely upon that they will behave exactly like the average picture of a thing that doesn't really exist. And that's where relationships pick up. So I guess I would say the answer to the question depends on the company and the combination of channels and approaches that they will use. But at some point, if we all agree that a human must talk to a human, that's a sales interaction. And that's where we should go, okay, marketing ought to cause that to happen. Bring in people that at least are good to have conversations with. We typically see companies not sure what to do with the sales enablement function and who ought to own, because we got to make materials that are actually specific enough, and case studies or individual things that are not 15-page white papers that somebody will actually consume that helps them make a decision. So sales enablement is right there, in that thing where I got to go, I got to sell this one, and I need a bunch of individual, many different types of things to tell that story in the way this person wants to hear that. Yeah. If there's a gray area that deserves a little more attention, it's that conversion happens right around where people are starting to think about sales enablement being actually useful and not the average kind of approach. I'm not throwing a 57-page marketing guided deck at my prospect. I'm just not. I got to make a specific approach. So,
for the record, marketing shouldn't be doing that either. I think that's, I love what you said, right? And so my definition is actually really pretty simple when it comes to when an opportunity is ready to be handed off and it's qualified to be handed off to somebody in sales, and that's when they actually request a demo and raise their hand and say, I want to talk about the thing that you've got because I think it might solve the pain point I've got. And that is a different, by and large anyways, different than the typical sort of marketing organization definition. So marketing tends to talk about things like MQLs, right? And look at how many MQLs we generated. We generated 4,000 MQLs this month.
And sales goes, they're all useless and they don't show up.
Sales is over here saying, hey, look, we're 50% of quota, or what?
Bring us decent leads.
Something's wrong. And send us more leads, or the leads you're sending us are crappy. And what the heck?
And what's that DMZ of sales and marketing? Is this place where we're both battling over, and it's the Q in the MQL and the SQL. How does this organization define qualified? Yeah. And can we all come together and say, what's qualified mean here? And exactly what things must take place to move from whatever arbitrary name we want to put on it because of our CRM. And if you can do that hard work that nobody ever does, you hear this MQL thing and SQL thing all the time. And people, I go, what is the precise definition of what causes the transition from lead to marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead, opportunity, whatever? It's the standard sort of thing that we all go, I don't know, that's just what you name it. And I just want to say why. And like the first thing we have to do many times with a company is go, what makes things enter and exit that name? What's the actual definition of the key thing that makes it switch? And you'd be amazed how many people never thought of that. They just decided it was a thing. And there's no universal definition of MQL or SQL. It depends on the company.
Yeah, it does. And I also think that's part of the problem is the organizational, the way the organization actually determines how sales and marketing work.
Sure.
They typically are going to fundamentally, they don't know they're doing this. This is the thing that I've realized is like nobody forms an org and says, I'm going to make sure that marketing and sales don't talk the same language. But they follow the framework, the standard mutually acceptable framework, and it's busted. And I think the organizations that are doing well, and that could be in professional services or it could be SaaS or whatever, but somewhere where you've got like a strong marketing and sales organization, there are companies out there that are doing it right. And one of the things that they have figured out is if marketing is not talking about revenue in their meetings, if they're not talking about MRR, ARR, if they're not talking about closed deals, like which ones are going to closed one, which ones, if they're not having those kinds of conversations, how much have we fed into the actual pipeline that are counting as revenue? If we're not talking about how the sales cycle, how long the sales cycle is, and then you know that you've got a misalignment. You've got a problem.
I love nothing more than revenue, man. Preach. Everything should be about revenue.
That's right. And I think the thing that drives me crazy is it's not that hard to fix. It's not, but it can't happen in sales or in marketing. Like it can't be done in the silos. It's got to be actually done at the executive level. And if that's not happening there, then what ends up happening is you still have the same people. And if you're not tying compensation in marketing to the same sort of numbers and success metrics that you see in sales, then ultimately there's no sort of incentive, and human nature can't take and correct some of the issues in the org. And those types of things you don't typically see happen. But as I'm sure you're here to say, when it's done, it's a beautiful thing.
I think this is the genesis has become the chief revenue officer. I sometimes see chief commercial officer, which is interesting as well. But the idea that when you have diametrically opposed functions in a company that you need a strategic integrator, and that's what CEOs do. And underneath that, you have this idea that sales is fundamentally, if you let sales run itself, it's like, I'm going to please that customer and give them whatever they want to get money. And marketing hates that because brands are centralized versions of messaging, and thou shalt not break the sort of way that we centrally talk about our thing. And that's a vertical function. It's an efficiency function. It's just like you don't build a unique product for everybody. And it's a scale thing, and there's good reasons for that. But when you have these diametrically opposed objectives in the same flow, you do need some kind of strategic integration there. And ultimately comes down to the answer being like, if we have a revenue focused leadership team and culture, we can find ways to build the rest of the thing to all behave correctly to the objective. And so in that, and I often see this in orgs, is just if leadership is swimming a different direction from each other, you can't say that. And for some reason, it's considered a bad form to just be like, oh, we're a company that just wants to make revenue. And I'm never saying that. Have a passion, have a vision, a thing aligns you for showing up to work, but let's not make the mistake that we can not be a revenue-driven organization. Now again, I don't work with funded companies where, and nor do I describe to the idea or subscribe to the idea that you can just blow up money out on the way to going public and still never make any money. I don't get it. That's never computed to me. As far as I'm concerned, we need money to run and pay people and build things, and the cheapest form of capital, even if you end up cashing out someday, it's still going to be based on revenue. So I just don't see why there would ever be a more important thing and integrate that with with the sort of overall passion of that company to do an important, meaningful service.
So here's the thing is that's a lot of my background is venture funded. And so from my perspective, there are good venture funded ideas that go on to mature and have a successful exit, and there are ones that don't. And typically the ones that aren't able to get the C or D round or whatever, usually it's later now. It used to be earlier. It used to be like you couldn't even get to a B. A C or a D round are those businesses that just have not truly found a repeatable, scalable revenue machine. And my thing is brand is not t-shirts and coffee mugs. Let's just be real clear for
engineering is right? Coffee or what do you call it? Ping pong tables and
I'm not talking about brand image, although that's super important. And don't, please, for anybody who's listening, I'm not saying that is not important. I'm saying that is not what we're talking about when we're having this conversation. We're talking about the brand, what people think about the thing that you're selling and what comes into their mind when your name or when they see your website. And that's what's really driving the people that are coming to the site and actually checking you out and then figuring out whether or not they think you have a product that might actually solve a particular pain point that they have. And of course, that's the point at which I draw the line. I say, okay, that's where once that conversation starts, usually this is why I like the lowest part of the marketing funnel that we could define as a true lead, a true opportunity would be somebody who's actually raising their hand and saying, and anything beyond that, anything before that is not an MQL yet. These are leads for sure, but they are a long way away potentially from becoming somebody who's ready to have a conversation. And I think the thing that we try to do is being in marketing, right? This is my background. So being in marketing, the thing that we have how we're incentivized, for lack of a better word, is to call a lead an MQL before it's an MQL. Right, before it's really, or an SAL, wherever you wanted to draw the line. And I think that's the challenge is we're not incentivized or tied to something that gives us the ability to call it what it is. Because if I just wanted to go out and I wanted to just generate 4,000 leads, I'd just go and sign up with, no disrespect to any of the vendors that are out there. I'm not even going to name them, but if I want to just go out and do a bunch of content syndication, I can get you a whole bunch of leads that'll never, ever convert.
Yeah.
And I know that. As a marketer, I know that. The problem is that typically executives don't, right? And so they think that the activity, for activity's sake, that the marketing team is doing and somehow those 4,000 are eventually going to mature. They will eventually mature, they will eventually fully bake, and they will eventually turn into something. At some point, you got to just call it what it is.
I don't know, planting seeds on your driveway. They're still seeds, but there's a lot more that goes into this. And you could totally see where that would lead to a very bitter sales force. Just saying, I could buy a list of email addresses that won't pay attention to me.
Yeah.
And then its sales activity is these guys never call anybody or anything. I can tell you that I'm a huge fan of, and you talked about booking demos, and that's a sassy kind of word. For me, I just think of it as an appointment-focused funnel is the best way to look at a business, at least until you can scale and standardize some types of sales enablement, which might take the place of a lot of that demo stuff. Ultimately, you show people the same thing over and over again. Can't little videos do that? So I think of it as, look, if we're going to build this out and try to figure out what customers want and learn from it, who's the person there and what's the mechanism that actually causes and has conversations? So you could use your sales force, drive as many appointments as you can through the funnel, record them all, every call, and then not just coach the salespeople on how you can do better, a la Gong and Mr. all these things, which is good business. Good sales coaching is good stuff. However, you also have an asset there, essentially, is a customer discovery call. Why don't we mine that for information that can help us understand what questions are being asked so that we have content prompts for marketing, and so that we show what proof points we need in sales enablement. And so product knows the majority of calls are asking for these things in this order. That really could inform your roadmap. And that's real customer stuff. That's not somebody sitting around inside our own echo chamber with a whiteboard talking about what thing we ought to build. So I'm always amazed that it doesn't use, like, why don't we get intel out of these conversations? If you were starting a company, you would tout your amazing ability to go out and talk to potential customers. And we interviewed 300 blah, 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 blah. And here's all the information we got. Like every day your salespeople are interviewing your target customer or not. And we just forget that discipline. And it just seems bizarre to me. So.
So sales for sure is one of the single biggest sources of data for a marketing team, but very few of them actually have conversations. And I think support is another one. You know where all the problems are because your support person's happy to tell you all of that are problems that the customers are having or the pain points that they're having, the issues. Sure. They're happy to tell you. And frankly, so are sales teams, right? Sales teams are absolutely happy to tell you if you have a conversation with them. And it's whether it's a tool that you're using or just Zoom recordings or whatever you want to do, you've got recordings of your customers actually telling you in their own words what the issues are or what the objections are that they need to mentally overcome. It just creates that feedback loop that you need for your marketing. But I think one of the things that I think we agree on, please tell me if we don't, taking those things, and that's really good marketing collateral as well. These are assets that you could actually turn into video clips and other things in app, things that are useful and helpful for somebody who's either getting onboarded or even pre-onboarding in terms of marketing. Some of the best marketing is just natural conversations with people that don't sound and feel salesy, and like prospects tend to really drop their guard and say, oh, okay, so this is actually somebody who's just like me, who has the exact same types of questions that I have, and they're working through those particular.
It would be fascinating to take those, interview style, like raw stuff, just almost like it's a podcast, and intersperse that with, we heard 100 different prospects over the course of 3 weeks said the same thing, and then intersperse those examples, and let's be creative together. You know what I love about what a prospect tells you is you could completely eliminate this idea of sales and marketing battling. There's no opinion here. Like, we all work for that person, and that person needs to give us money or we're screwed in aggregate. So, like, how does this debate even happen? It's because there's too much internal discussion without asking questions. And you don't even need to put extra effort into, like, how many times have you seen a company pay consultants? Let's go talk to our customers and find out what they think. Like, you're already doing that. For God's sake, you ought to be doing it.
Don't pay somebody else to do.
If we're that disconnected, forget it. Like, we're screwed.
Yeah.
So
totally agree with that. Yeah. If your marketing team, if the people that are writing your content and writing your landing pages, your copy, your emails, if they are that disconnected from the customer, that is one of the single biggest opportunities that your team has. It is bar none one of the single biggest opportunities.
And reduce some of those cultural things too by just saying, I've seen some companies be like, everybody's going to work the support queue and everybody's going to work the SDR queue for 3 weeks when you start. And then you get to have your job. And that, talk about like throw in the deep end. You have a lot more respect for maybe everybody needs to try to write decent copy, because I respect marketers have skills we don't have either. But it can be integrated. And I think it's just about the human experience of just whoever decided we ought to separate these things. That's completely insane.
Yeah. I think from a scale perspective, the larger the company, you end up having some advantages there. The challenge that I've always seen is that the bigger the company gets, the further away they get from the customer. And when the further away you get from the customer, that's when bad things start to happen, right? Your messaging starts falling flat and it's not resonating as well as it needs to. And those are things that are super important when it comes to staying right there and having your messaging resonate well and get out to the customer.
I think if we were saving every call that happens for support and every ticket and every email and every call that happens for sales, and you actually mind those for every question that gets asked, those should be easy data to pass up. It's work. And I think it's easier not to do it, so we don't do it.
So I totally agree. So talk to me about tools. So I have this thing, and I won't bore you to death with my little soapbox that I like to get up on, but I have this thing about tools where point solutions, things like that, all claim the same thing, which is it's going to make you a better marketer or it's going to make you a better salesperson. And of course, all vendors want to say that, want to claim that. What's your take on the tools that are out there today in the MarTech stack or in the sales side of things? Where is it helpful? Is it hurtful? Is it oversold? Like, what's your take?
I want to be on the cutting edge of all these things. It's completely overwhelming. And the number of people that reach out with a tool, it might be amazing. Like, I would love nothing more all day long than to play with amazing stuff and figure out how it goes together, but it's impossible. And to keep it simple enough to actually do our job, you end up having to just say, it might be awesome, but I don't know. And I'm going to choose the dialer and the text writing machine and the CRM and the documentation thing that I like, and I'm going to stick to it. And I wish I could innovate, but when there's an ecosystem of 15,000 tools and a new MarTech, sales tech, RevOps thing comes out every day, I don't know how to process that. And I guess that's the difficult part. Is I understand why everybody wants to innovate everything and make the next version better and have your own company, and I just fluxament, if you will, on what to do with it, because I wish that I could integrate all those things, but I can't even keep up with understanding what's available.
Yeah, I will say this: there is no platform that's going to solve all your problems. It's just not, right? Yeah, and sales and marketing tend to use opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to the tech stack. You've got Salesforce perhaps on one side, and you've got something else on the marketing series of tools. And my issue has always been the same. And by the way, this goes exactly back to why sales and marketing don't talk the same language. It's because vendors have forced us into these separate camps, because they use different language on let's call it the Gartner quadrant or any kind of Gartner research. They tend to use different types of language when they're talking about sales, when they're talking about marketing. And so, of course, sales is talking a specific language that sounds eerily familiar to something like what you would get in Gartner. Very same thing on the marketing side, eerily similar. And that's where this stuff comes from, right? Is you got these third-party research companies that are independently, I'm putting that in air quotes for anybody who's not watching, independently are establishing the line of what is the product. And that's something that bothers me, because ultimately they're feeding into the problem. And when you have something that is a solution, like I call it a holistic solution, a true holistic solution, a platform that actually talks, where sales and your CRM and marketing and their marketing automation and email and all the tools are all working together under the same roof, where all of that data is being shared, and it's all all of these individual features, things from ads to chat bots to whatever. All of these things are coming together so that they're enhancing the product, they're enhancing the customer journey, and that's not the way that we're sold. That's not the way that vendors sell us. Typically, they want to say MQLs for marketing. They want to talk closed deals on the other side, and never the two shall meet. And I think that's wrong. I think and we as executives, like we as marketers, we as salespeople, we buy it. And so we gotta fix that along the way. And that's, anyway. See, I am up on my soapbox.
No, I'll comment on that. I think, and this is an interesting thing, because like I came up in sales by having to do it and not by study. So people will say, what's your favorite book? And like, I don't know. I've read a few of them. Like I take a little snippet out of it, but I think it's the same way. And like you're talking about, and look, there's good reasons that like people try to make sense of what categories of tools are there and stick them on a quadrant. The good reason for them is probably that they charge 50 grand for it. But like I do browse those reports because I just at least want to know what categories of things are being discussed now, so that I can read it and at least know everybody, when they say this thing, this is what they're talking about. I may not subscribe to it. So that's the level that I think those are useful. But you also don't hear, you hear it from the procurement perspective on sort of these tools. But how many companies have you walked into where they have 65 different things and everybody has their own point solution and nothing's integrated? And then you dig down into it and you realize like somebody tied them into a proprietary CRM, homegrown something that's like the master data single source of truth, and everything else is hooked up to that. And God help us, like you just have to nuke it and start over. And I think that the objective of being,
and you have some sales ops people that are just all day, all they're doing is running and normalizing. That's their entire job, is just running.
and I did a lot of engineering work and product and as a dev, and I just like the first thing every dev says is as soon as they walk in, they go, "This is idiotic. Why would anybody do this?" And so what you find is that there were good reasons at the time, and change happens, and we did our best, and everybody did their best, and they're not morons. However, now that we have what is in effect process debt, if it's not technical debt, now we need to unwind that. And there are good reasons that things happened in companies that are now a boondoggle because we probably never thought we'd actually succeed and get that big anyway. And accountants would call that a going concern. And now what do? You mortgaged a good decision a couple of years ago, and you refactored and took out a second mortgage on that decision a couple of years after that, even when you still knew the interest rate was too high, and now we got to pay the piper. So.
That's right. Yeah, we didn't have an alternative 10 years ago. So everything we had was a point solution. Everything we had was a particular individual product that solved a specific pain point. Email, chatbot, etc., landing page builders, or your CRM, or whatever. And they weren't supposed to talk together. And the closest thing you had was something like Zapier that would stitch everything together potentially. And I've talked a little bit about that, where I feel like it's a little bit of myth. Anyway, you can't solve it with Zapier. And so I think the challenge is that's the old way. That's all you had. And so you don't blame the organization. Right. I don't think you blame the marketer or the sales leaders. You don't blame them because there wasn't anything as an alternative. And then you're right. About 5 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we re-upped and said, look, the switching cost is too high. We're not interested. But the hidden costs of not doing it are immense. Not having everything work together, not having everything enhanced by what we call sort of the life of the lead. It's all of these touch points that you have from beginning, from an ad impression or something way up funnel, all the way through to a closed won deal. I think the challenge there is if you don't have that, you are vastly. It's not you're gonna be behind. You are behind. And the way that it shows up, the way that you feel is when your marketing ops person is running reports, so at least 2 days out of the week, right? When your marketing and sales teams are not talking together in the same language. They're not looking at the same reports. And those reports, they're siloed, right? One way or the other. Some of them are stuck over here and it's Salesforce, and some of them are stuck over here somewhere else. And it shows up in ever dropping sort of conversion rates across your site. It shows up in meetings declining over time. Like all of these things, it just shows up in the numbers. We don't call it what it is, and there's inefficiency that's happening underneath that's driving all of that stuff, but we don't call it.
I mean, holistic solutions, I do think ultimately make the most sense, and of course every vendor wants you to commit a little bit under their tent, and there's lock-in and there's different things, and yes, we can integrate around like other functions, and integrated marketing, revenue, sales stack doesn't necessarily behave relative to what integrated finance and ERP stack wants you to do. And you're always going to have those like middleware layers. They're easier to deal with now with the thing like Zapier. Like that's a good reason to have those and sort of enterprise scale APIs. But you're right. If I was walking into a business, I would say you should change your business practices for the 20% that an integrated or holistic tool doesn't meet, and just retrain yourself just based on at least you can commit to something and not allow the proliferation of point solutions, because it's impossible and you're going to have to unwind it later. You might give up a little bells and whistles, but keeping it simple is much better. And you can't scale complicated. So.
If we are a marketer, somebody who's in sales leadership, and we are trying to solve the core problem with technology, we're in for a world of trouble.
That's the real thing. is that these are ultimately just solutions that are not people. And organized groups of people trying to do things together. We say that like in the last year, everybody goes remote, and like the whole way you conceive the world got exploded in terms of working together. And if it didn't for you because you were already there, then it did for your clients. So you're still in that boat. But these are just, everything is groups of people trying to do the right thing under the incentive systems and objectives that they have while thinking about the rest of their universe that has nothing to do with you. And the idea that technology could make anything that much better on that is foolhardy. Yes, we also need it, and I think we all aspire to make big, complicated things that we can accomplish relative to the technology, which is fun and visionary and wasn't possible 10 years ago. So I think as groups of humans, we're now capable of scale that we cannot manage. And that's interesting. We can create problems that we couldn't possibly have imagined. We can make them, we just can't solve them.
I think that's right. But the marketing, like the MarTech stack, is supposed to serve the goal, not the other way around. And marketers, marketing ops, sales ops, we're frenetic creatures by nature. So we like to throw stuff up against a wall and see what sticks. And I say this a lot. Just go and look at somebody's corporate card and look at all the stuff they've signed up for and all the different point solutions. It's crazy. And so the ultimate, you talk about we're all people trying to center ourselves around a single common goal. And I think that is the one thing that if it's done right, it should serve, the marketing stack should serve that purpose, that should serve that goal. And so like a holistic KPI driven approach
to the goal
that sort of simplifies your life. Yeah, exactly. Simplifies your life. You're talking the same language. Makes your job
easier. It should do that. Now,
right?
What did you just presume? And I think this is the essence of like why consultants have jobs. What you just presumed is that everybody there is on the same page and can actually articulate what that particular central goal is.
Yep.
And that's the problem, because you walk into one of those companies and you talk to all those leadership and ask that, what's the one unifying goal that we're all here to do? And you'll get 10 answers. It's not dissimilar to the idea of gathering information from sales calls, because if I was consulting, that's the first thing I would do. And I'd write it on a big card and I'd stick it up in front of everybody and go, all right, here's what we think is the one goal that looks like 10.
So ultimately, I don't know, I can't remember when I did this, but a couple of months ago, I did this LinkedIn post that was really popular with CFOs because I was talking about if you want to succeed in your job, doesn't matter if you're in sales or marketing, you got to start talking like the CFO, start thinking like the CFO does, right? In terms of, and that's obviously a broad generalization. Don't quote me specifically on that, but it is essentially saying, hey, look, we need to understand and start talking about, we got to start talking about LTV. We got to start talking about ACV. It doesn't matter where, I don't care if you're in product or if you're in sales or marketing, like we all should be talking about these things the way that they contribute revenue to the business, to feed the business. Because to your point, you're never going to get to whatever the logical, either it's an exit or it's something else, unless you have something that's showing like a predictable positive trend in the up and to the right direction. Yeah. So this has been fun. I think one of the things that I'm always thinking about is there are organizations that need some of that change. And you're right, absolutely. To your point earlier, like I was assuming that the organization started with that underlying truth of, hey, we got to all be sort of like thinking like we know what the number one goal here is. And you're right, not every organization
or
does,
think they do. That's I think the most insidious piece is every one of those people you ask would be honestly answering it to the best of their ability, and that's where like leadership people get crapped on, because they're like, oh, I'm going to repeat the mission statement at every meeting or whatever. But what is that? Just internal messaging and marketing. It's just, do we all understand that when asked this question, this is the answer? And do you understand why that's the answer? And people get tired of all hands meetings and raw pep rallies and stuff, but there's a reason that exists. And the faster you and more you grow your company, the less, talk about distance from customer, distance from vision is going to be exactly the same thing. Hiring 100 people every 3 weeks, it's impossible for them to care as much. And the distance from founder grows and grows, and we forget to tell people, like, this is why we're here. Does everybody know that?
Yes. Obviously, you have a ton of experience diving into companies, multiple organizations, describing this exact same thing that we spent the last hour talking about. Like, how would somebody get a hold of you just to talk you through like some of their challenges, things that they're working on?
Well, we got a website, add10ADD10 zero.co. That's a cool place to go. All my blog stuff and videos and everything are on there. I'm a host of the Leaders of B2B podcast. So I interview B2B executives and founders on there. Lots of great learning. I get a lot out of that. And David Ledgerwood, LinkedIn. I'm always open for conversations. I spend a lot of time doing that.
Well, Ledge, great meeting you, great talking to you, super enjoyable. This is one of the better episodes. I felt like just talking about some of these things, and we need to do it again.
Eric, thanks so much, man. It was fun.
All right. Hey, you too. Take care.